And a lot of times, I think this is how we can view following Jesus. We hear about how if we want to follow Jesus, we have to live like him, we have to stay away from all kinds of sin and evil, we have to be holy. And we think, that sounds a lot harder than what I'm doing now. That sounds like it would inconvenience me a lot more. Why would I follow someone like that? Why would I live my life to emulate Jesus when it just seems like that would make things more difficult? And it's that kind of thinking that led us to the question that we're answering today. See, we're starting a series at Broadway called You Asked For It, or YAFFE as we like to call it. And we've done this series quite a few times throughout the years at Broadway. It's a series where you give us your questions and we try our best to answer them. And in the past few weeks, we've gotten a lot of questions from you, good questions, some of them that are pretty deep and pretty difficult. And over the summer, you're going to get to hear our pastors answer these for you. And today, I'm going to try to answer the question, my life is fine. Why should I follow Jesus? And this to me is a very good question. Because I think for many of us, we can think of reasons why you should follow Jesus if your life is falling apart. If you have no hope, no sense of direction, no one that loves you, then following Jesus makes a lot of sense. Because when we think about Jesus, for a lot of us, whether this has been taught explicitly or not, we see him as a fixer. Jesus is the one who comes in and fixes our life, who gives us hope, who is the answer to all our problems. But the only issue with that is, if life is fine, if you don't have any real problems you need fixing, and you're not in need of answers, then what really is the point of following Jesus? Especially if following Jesus means giving up what I want to do. If it means potentially making my life more difficult, more inconvenient, why would I do that? Why should I follow Jesus if my life is fine? Now, we're going to be reading in Matthew chapter 4, which is the first book in the New Testament. And at this point, Jesus has just begun his ministry of preaching and teaching. And in verse 18, we see him call the very first disciples. It says this, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, Jesus saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Following Jesus is not about convenience, it's about communion. It's not about convenience, it's about communion. Now to clarify, when I say communion, I'm not talking about the cracker and juice that we have at the end of the month here. I'm talking about relationship, that one-on-one time spent with God. That is what it's about. I have a friend who lives in Abbotsford, and I live all the way out here in Vancouver, and to go and see her, it would take about an hour to get there. Which isn't the worst. I know some of you have to go a lot farther to see friends and family, but obviously it isn't super convenient. Convenient would be having her across the street from me. But despite the fact that it's a bit out of my way and takes some time, I truly don't mind at all. It doesn't keep me from going to see her because I value that time that we get together. I value our conversations, our hangouts. I value that communion. And I think that's the same attitude we need to have when it comes to Jesus too. I'm not going to lie to you, following Jesus is not always convenient. It's not convenient to come or watch church on a Sunday morning when you could be sleeping in. It's not convenient to spend time reading your Bible when you could be watching Netflix. It's not convenient to follow a God who holds you to a higher standard than the world does. So if it's about convenience, then following Jesus does not make the most sense. But that's not what it's about. It's about communion. It's about that time spent with Jesus, that relationship that he invites you into. And that despite the fact that things might be difficult and your life might not look the same that it used to, that communion is worth it. But you know why I think they got out of the boat? I think they did it because they recognized that a relationship with Jesus is way more valuable than the conveniences of this world. They recognized that following Jesus was less about what they were leaving behind, and more about who they were going after. They saw that whatever it was that they were giving up was going to be for something greater, and that something greater above all else was communion with Him. And it's out of that communion, that relationship that we have with Jesus, that those things that it seems like we're giving up, the things that seem to be inconvenient, suddenly they don't matter as much. It's out of that relationship, that living in step with God, loving as He loves, doing as He did, it isn't as much work. In John 14:23, Jesus is recorded saying, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." And I think what holds so many people back from following Jesus isn't necessarily because they don't agree with what He says or because they don't like church. It's because they like their lifestyle and they don't want to change. And what I want to tell you is that when you follow Jesus, when you truly have a relationship with Him, then those things that you thought mattered, those things that you thought would be so hard to give up, they become so insignificant. You might think you have your life all together. Things might be going great for you. Who knows? Maybe you have your dream career and ideal relationship, your finances are in order. You might not feel the need to go to Jesus and ask to follow Him. But the reality is that you don't have to, because He's already come to you. The invitation to follow Him is right there, and He's simply waiting for your response. And while I can't promise you that a life following Jesus is easy or perfect or that it all makes sense, what I can say is that it is worth it. It's worth it because of who He is. It's worth it because of the relationship. And it's worth it because He sees something in you before you might even see something in yourself. And He wants to invite you into a life that has a greater purpose than what it does right now.